All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Katie Sombat. It's February 6, 2025. We're at the Nicholson Library, Linfield University in McMinnville. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. First question, as you know, is why wine?
Yes, a very loaded question. Wine has sort of been in my periphery and center of my career on and off in the last decade, but I sort of fell into wine. Hospitality is what really drove me into seeking more answers about wine. But growing up, wine wasn't really a huge centerpiece of my family, lineage, if you will. But my mom drank a lot of wine, mainly white wine. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother did. And they would always order dry Chardonnay. It was always, I would like a dry Chardonnay. And it was at celebratory dinners, big landmark capstones, holidays, but that was really it. And of course in college, as one does, being more exploratory, but the bottom line was cost. So a lot of Carlo Rossi, a lot of Franzia. That was really the extent. I had a very zero baseline of wine. In college, I studied environmental science. Kind of took me a little bit of a time to get to that major. I was just I have a curious mind. I want to learn everything and know everything. A lot of things pique my interest. So I, at first, was a communications major, and then was like, this doesn't fascinate me at all. I like to talk, but I don't know what I'm going to do with this. It was too general, I guess, at least at that 18-year-old brain of mine. And I just kept searching, like, what brings me joy? What am I really passionate about? Like, what do I keep coming back to that piques my interest, that spark, if you will? And it was nature, and I thought geology was it. I was really fascinated in the formation of rocks. I grew up born and raised outside of Cleveland, Ohio, the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. But when I was 16, we moved to upstate New York, Albany, so the suburbs of Albany. So, through and through a suburban kid. Has its perks, has its pluses, has its minuses, but was always itching to get out of that environment of that cookie cutter. But I went to a state school. The SUNY system is just amazing, State University of New York. And I started at SUNY Plattsburgh, which was really close to Montreal, spent a lot of time there, and then finished up at SUNY Albany. But in that time, geology was of quite great interest. There's so much cool geological wonder in that part of the eastern United States. And I was talking to a TA in a lab, and he was just like, well, what would you want to do with this? And I was like, that's a great answer, or that's a great question. What are you doing? He's like, well, honestly, unless you want to continue on your academia career and maybe teach, right now, it's the main jobs are with oil companies. And I was like, that's just, no, thank you. That's not, that goes against all my values of why I'm here and learning and sustainability. It just was okay, I guess I'm back to ground zero. I don't want to go into that field. So environmental science kind of was a natural landing pad of just, it also had a lot of different tangents you can go down. Lots of things you can study, so it really was a great jumping off point for me with a concentration in plant biology. And when I was finishing up, it was 2007, and I really was just wanting to see the world more. Again, I was done with suburbia. I had decided to finish school at SUNY Albany, so I was close to home. I wasn't living on campus anymore, so I was just really feeling that itch to go and to be an independent person. And a professor for a wetland ecology course was talking about this organization called SCA, Student Conservation Association. It's a really great program for students to go and be stewards of the land. There's many different fields or areas you can work in. And at the time, I applied for a year-long internship at this really unique ecosystem right in my backyard. It was really close to campus, called the Albany Pine Bush. It's this really cool, very rare ecosystem of this inland, like pine barren. With these really beautiful sandy dunes. I'm like, you're walking in sand. It was just extraordinary. And the year-long internship was really about prescribed burns and fire ecology, which I had no knowledge in. I did not study that. I'm coming from the East Coast. We don't really do wildland firefighting. So it was I was a little not quite at that level. So I wasn't quite ready for that position, but they were like, there's many others you can do. And at that time, there weren't so many availability, like open positions. Many were in rural areas like South Dakota, which I was like, I don't know if I really want to go to South Dakota. Thank you. I think Coeur d'Alene was one, Yakima, but there was one opening in the Warm Springs, on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation. And my sister was here in Portland. She had moved a year prior. It was her stepping stone to get to Hawaii. She never quite made it. Now she's in Florida. So I think, I think that having a child changed that trajectory. But that was the goal. This is the closer step. So it was kind of a no-brainer. It was a 6-month-long internship, and I learned so much just about the cultural history of Native Americans, tribal land. I always knew it was such a privilege and honor to be on that land, working on that land, sharing the space, learning from the community. We were living in Warm Springs, and this was 2007. So Bend was still this really small community. Redmond was still just a blip on the map, growing at a fast clip, but still, it had not seen the growth it has seen today. So, and it was a city of 5,000, a town of 5,000. So very small to come from these bigger outposts on the periphery of a city to a very small town. But it was such a great growing and learning experience for me. And learning about fire ecology and preservation and data and writing papers, all of that came into play. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And after that ended, and some of my friends that I still talk to today were part of that program. It was really, really unique, and I hold it dear to my heart for sure. But at that time, the internship ended, and I just was kind of at a crossroads. And I was like, what to do next? And there was an opportunity in Ventura, California to work with a biologist, and that was definitely on the table. But Portland was really calling my name. I actually had planned on finishing my undergrad at PSU. I think I applied my freshman, or going into my sophomore year, and got accepted. But when it came down to it, I was a little too shy to actually be that independent person I thought I was. I needed a little bit more time to just kind of find myself. So I pressed pause on that, finished school in New York, but Portland was always there on the periphery of this place is really cool. What is this place? And my sister was living there, so I had family, and I missed her dearly. So there was this job opportunity. It was a new company, startup based in Corvallis, and they were working with this new technology called LiDAR. It was infrared sensoring to do mapping. Really cool. So my job would have been getting into a small plane and using this technology to map for many uses. And it was so cool. I got down to the final, met the owners, but it was a little out of my bandwidth. I was a little just this young kid, just I don't know what I'm doing. But I tried, and I didn't get the job. So what does one do? What has always been my support, my network, my net? Hospitality. That's what I did in undergrad. It has always been there for me. It's one of those institutions where it allows you to be and do other things while still making a living. So that was really important to me. So I will say, though, the restaurant scene in Portland was extremely intimidating. I don't know, I guess I was looking at identity and like who I was and taking that exterior a little too to heart, a little too much to heart. So it was a little intimidating. My sister's best friend from high school was also living out here, so she would take me to like the big community hubs, Hawthorne, what was another one? Like the Pearl. It was taking me to these little spots of like, maybe you can work here, maybe you can work here. And I'm like, I don't fit in. Like this is over my head. I don't know where I fit in, but I figured it out. I found a job at a sushi restaurant and just started working, and still the drive was to continue on the journey of environmental science and working in some sort of nonprofit. I definitely want to go back to school, so I was doing a lot of volunteering at the time with different organizations, trying to network, just be in community, learn what was going on in the region. And then I started taking post-grad classes at PSU and got really into different aspects of that, met some wonderful professors, started working on a project about remediation of ivy, different tools of how you do that in a local park in Portland. That was really cool. And at that time, I was working at the Heathman restaurant. It's when Philippe Boulot, who won a James Beard Award, was still consulting. It was a major hub in the downtown area. The Arlene Schnitzer was right there. So we got the theater crowd. It was a really cool experience, something I had never experienced before in my serving career. I was working for chain restaurants mainly. And I got a job as a cocktail server, and you have to learn how to sell. That's like your main thing. It is burn and turn. You've got to know your stuff. So first it was spirits and cocktails, and then I wanted more challenge and learning the glass pour list, because bottles weren't necessarily the biggest seller there, because it's really a stepping stone to something else, being in that little bar area. And that bottle list was intimidating. I think it was over 1,000 SKUs. All parts of the world. I was just I was a fish out of water, really, truly. But I really wanted to learn. I was like challenged by it. It was intriguing to say the least. And at that time, this was like probably 2011, 2012 maybe, the Court of Master Sommeliers would host some of their sessions or classes there. And so there was a sort of a lottery for a few free seats, and I got accepted. I kind of answered the call and got a seat at one of the intro courses, and it was, a lot. I was overwhelmed, for sure. This thing they did for the deductive tasting, every row would get up and you would take one piece of deductive tasting, like from what the color to the smell, all the way down to like, what do you think this wine is? What do you think grape is? Where do you think it comes from? And I was just like, please, I hope when it lands on our like group, I get one of the first ones, because I'm listening to my peers talk about what they're tasting, what they're smelling, and I'm like, I taste wine? Like, I don't know. I don't have like the foundation. So it was a really good challenge. It definitely was, it was scary for sure, but I did it. You just take it one step at a time. It was exciting, to say the least. I think when I did get, they got to our row, I think I had to like talk about flavor profile, and I was like, here we go. I can't remember the grape. That's already out of my mind, kind of like a traumatic experience, but moved on. I passed. It was really intensive. You have 2 days, and after day 2, you take the exam. There's really only 1 day to study. And I was working like nights at the time, so any free time in that like 48-hour period I was studying. But passed, and that just like was this, everything changed, I think. It was it wasn't like, oh, I'm moving into wine. But it was a more or less 180. I realized I'm gonna put a pause on grad school. Like I was applying to grad school, but I was like, I'm gonna put a pause on that, put that on the bench for just a moment. And I wanna explore this a little bit more, because it piqued so many of my interests. Cultural, historical, science, chemistry, everything. Like, I was like, this is like the endless, if you wanna be a career student, here you go, like silver platter. So, it still was quite a long journey. It ebbs and flows in my life, this course of wine and how I got into it. But from there, Continued working at the Heathman, diving that list little by little, talking to the somms as much as possible, getting like any bits of information I could. Because still, I think at that point, like buying wine at that level, at that caliber, was kind of hard. It was like out of my price point at that point. Already, some of these benchmark producers already were like, they were out of that arena of like what you can afford. So just trying my best at what was affordable at the time and just asking a lot of questions. And that kind of what eventually brought me to Olympia Provisions, OP for short. And I was working at the Northwest location. They had just moved the meat shop. And it was the most darling restaurant. You had the meat shop in the back, which was crazy, like putting on the whole suit just to go get your salami for the restaurant. But the restaurant was tiny, like a little French bistro, with this beautiful vintage rotisserie chicken oven thing, and it was so cool. And I met the most amazing people. And at the time, Star Black was the wine director who had a really rich history in wine, self-taught, which really I admired, really admired. And that's really where it opened my world into this minimal intervention natural wine. Natural wine wasn't really being spoken about. You know, it wasn't a term that we were using freely at that time. This was like 2013. But minimal intervention, smaller production, taking care of the land, taking care of the stewards of the land, like that was all part of the package. And it really spoke to me, obviously, with my history and background in science. And Star Black just wrote the best emails and talking about wine and sharing her knowledge and opening up the floor to distributors like Bonnie Crocker and learning about Spanish wine and sherry. Oh my gosh, she just was like, I was like, what? You know all of this? And just spewing all, like waxing poetic almost. I was just enamored by all of these people. And Star was a huge mentor to me, very much so. But at that time, yes, I was learning about wine, natural wine. I was selling it on the floor. I was getting really excited. I was able to taste these things and realizing I really like this stuff. Like, it's really, it's about typicity. It changes. It evolves over time. It has a real story to tell. Like, these wines are like photographs in a way of the time and place. It was really unique. And I'm realizing more and more, I'm like, I really like this minimal intervention natural wine. But I was really focused on leveling up in my career. I knew hospitality was something I really wanted to focus on because the food scene was so rich, and it really kind of spoke to me in the community that was being built around it, and the amazing farmland that we have, and the farm to table, all of that really spoke to me, and that's kind of wanted to stay in that hospitality realm. So I started to kind of work my way up the ladder in management. And I got the opportunity to become the GM of Olympia Provisions in the Northwest location. And that was really exciting to me, to really level up, really kind of be a leader. I like that. I like educating. I come from actually a long line of nurses. I won't ever be a nurse. I can't stand blood. But it really speaks to me that I obviously am one of service. I like to be of service. I like to be in community, and that really speaks to me. So that's kind of where the leadership comes in, and being that voice and just supporting each other. And around that time, it was about 3 years since I took the intro course for the Court of Master Sommeliers. And I made this assumption, or maybe I had misread, like you kind of have 3 years from when you take that to take the certified sommelier course, or it resets itself. You kind of have to start from ground zero. And I was like, I'm like, well, this was a gift given to me. Like I kind of won this seat. I kind of owe it to myself to try. Like, I don't know if that's my career trajectory, but it's still of interest to me. And I don't want to let this thing go. It was a gift. So I signed up with, I think, 7 or 8 weeks notice. And at that time, I hadn't been selling wine on the floor very much, so like I really lost a lot of knowledge. I was all about P&Ls and analytical and like labor costs. You know, I wasn't thinking about wine at all. I was drinking it, I was enjoying it, but so I crammed, and I don't do well with cramming, so I didn't pass the first time. I passed on my service, which I'm astounded that I passed. Luckily I had a really kind master somm. It really does like help when you're doing the service exam, because some of them can be really like straight and narrow. And this one, he was cracking jokes. He made it comfortable for me, kind of eased the nerves a bit. So, but I did pass my blind tasting, which still, I'm like, I passed blind and I passed service. It was just theory I didn't pass. So, okay, like I tried and it was good. I'm glad I did it because taking the exam is half the battle. Like how you show up in the exam, understanding your anxiety levels and your nerves and how to process that. It's huge. I mean, it really can derail you. I've seen it. Some of my closest friends, like it really can derail you in an exam mode. You can be at your best, your sharpest, and your nerves can get the best of you. So I'm really glad I did that and experienced it. And again, kind of took a pause, still wasn't sure. And after a year of management, I knew I kind of wanted to change it up. And I got the opportunity to work as a service manager for Plaza del Toro. It was John and Renee Gorham's private event space. They were part of Toro Bravo Hospitality. That is no longer really a network in Portland anymore. So I was a service manager, basically the boots on the ground. I executed the events. I worked closely with the director of affairs, Katie Gross. She is absolutely amazing, still like such a powerhouse in that field, and learned so much about hospitality, how to sell, because events are truly unique, and it's feast or famine. So in that realm, as a service manager, I got to meet Mindy Cook, who's phenomenal. And she's also, I'm pretty sure, I think she maybe eventually did some certifications, but mainly self-taught. But I learned so much about Spanish wines through her. And it was a little bit hard because private events, it's very different than procuring wine for a list or a restaurant. Really, it's about the grape, the price point, so it's redundancy a lot of the time. You're seeing a lot of the same players because it's in the same price point, or you're like searching for those grapes that are going to be appealing to a mass group versus a small group. So it's fine. I still learned a lot. Mindy was still very much available and offering classes, and we still had to know and be present with the whole restaurant group as a whole. I think especially as a management level, because sometimes I would help out at one of their other locations, because in private dining world, it's feast or famine. It's either you have a ton of events or you have no events. And also at that time, I realized this is kind of, in a way, boring. It doesn't suit all of my personalities, if you will. I need to have my hands on a lot of things, not just a few things. That's okay. So, all right, I did this. And I knew I was kind of looking for my next thing. And in that time, because I had more time on my plate, I decided to press pause on the court, but start my level 3 with the WSET. I like to say WSET. And Mimi Martin which at the time was only doing level 3 in Portland. And my friend who I met at the Heathman, Jennifer Hembold, who was working at Cooper's Hall, she and I were still in touch, and she was also very interested in wine and kind of wanting to level up. And she introduced me to the WSET. I wasn't really looking for more certifications, truly, but she leveled up. And again, at this point, I still hadn't passed level 3 with the court. I took it in 2015. I didn't pass and kind of pressed pause. But what interests me about the WSET is that it's more diverse in the subject matter, whereas the court, it's way more of this tunnel vision linear. If you want to work in service, yes, the court makes complete sense. But I wasn't sure if that was my end goal. I had a lot of interests. So that's why the WSET really appealed to me, and it was in Portland. And I also valued the structure, showing up, the accountability, the networking. I learned that, yes, self-learning, and is really hard for me. I don't do my best. How do I build structure around this? What do I study? The information is daunting. If you kind of ever walked into any wine book, you're like, whoa, this is intense. There's so much to learn here. So many rabbit holes to go down, which I did. So I needed accountability. I needed structure because I'd go off topic a lot. This is really cool. Learning about some historical fact and the monks. And I'm like, what? So it was really, really cool. So did that. I did really well, passed with distinction. That was the only time I think I got such a high score. But it really it built that self-confidence I needed to be oh, right. I really enjoy this subject matter and I really want to focus on this more. And shortly after, and I also in that class met Josh Hammerling, who went on to start his own label in California. And he started making sparkling wine and now he has a really diverse portfolio. An amazing guy, so cool. His wines are amazing. They're in our market. Delicious Wine sells them, so if you ever see it, I highly recommend. Little plug, Josh, but shortly after that, we decided, let's just go ham. Let's just go all in. Let's do WSET diploma. Why not? I've got time on my hands. But unfortunately, like Mimi Martin now offers diploma, but it was either California, Napa, there was a course, British Columbia, or Boston. So that was kind of a whole new level of like, well, so now I'm gonna have to study online and take my courses in San Francisco, or take my exam in San Francisco. And that was kind of an exciting experience. Spent a lot of time in that city. Got to really learn and love that city and the food scene there, the food culture. Traveled a little bit during this time as well to California, Sebastopol, Sonoma, kind of opening my world up into the California wine scene and the new generation of California wine. That was really exciting. And also merging at that time was, okay, I want to move on from Plaza del Toro, what's next? And I saw this job out there for Tusk as a beverage director or wine director. And I was like, I'm not there. I don't know my shit. I just didn't feel like I had that experience yet. But a friend of mine, interestingly enough, Sam Basker, I met him at the Heathman. I trained him at the Heathman. He didn't last very long. He was like, no, thank you, this isn't for me. Understandable. And then he trained me at OP. And then quickly left to move to San Francisco. And he, at the time, was working at Tusk. And he reached out to me. He's like, Katie, there's this position. I think you'd be really good for it. I can get you, you want me to get you a meeting? And I was like, why not? Like, you believe in me. Okay. All right, like, what's to lose here? I'm up for the challenge. But I mean, Tusk, this was probably 6 months into Tusk's opening. They were in the limelight. I mean, very much a focal point of our restaurant scene. Lots of media attention. So it was a big, tall, like, job, big shoes to fill, right? And I met with the owners and I got the position. But luckily it wasn't like, okay, here you go, figure it out. Scott Frank of Bow and Arrow and Delicious Wines, he was actually kind of consulting and he started the initial wine list. So he became my mentor. And it was really a nice ease into it. So for about the first 6 months, I worked closely with him and then kind of he handed off the wine list. I kind of grew up and graduated. But in that time, I learned so much about how do you build a wine list? I mean, of course, it's all about what is the food program? Like really, it's about pairing wine with food, number one, and make it enjoyable. And he had the same ethos and mission statement as I did of minimal intervention, small production, taking care of the land, making sure our environmental impact is there. So we were both on that same wavelength. And also, the wine list has to speak to the ethos and mission statement of the restaurant, right? They need to all align. I really believe in that. And he also taught me like how to build relationships. That's the number one core tenet I still take away from him of build your relationships with your distributors and your distribution companies and your representatives. They are crucial to how you build a list and how you navigate, and I was a sponge during this time. It led to burnout just because I was accepting appointments left and right. I didn't have a schedule. I didn't know what a schedule meant. I didn't have boundaries because I really wanted to learn so much. I was a true sponge. Like, I want to taste this. I want to taste that. I want to go to that session. I want to go to that workshop. I was just a student with a very curious mind, and it was exciting for sure. But like, I had to scale it back and have some boundaries of you can't accept appointments willy-nilly because what happened was I was working really long hours because I was on the floor at night. I'd come in early to accept these appointments, and then I would just be exhausted, right? So that kind of led. I spent about a year and a half at Tusk, and it was a lot. It was a wonderful experience. I met some of the most amazing, talented people. I learned so much about service there, how to really like stand out in hospitality, how to cater to people, how to make people feel special, how to pair wine with a very eclectic menu with bold spices. I mean, that was such a cool challenge to like really step up to. But at that time, I was just kind of like, whew, I need to scale it back. I'm a little burnt out. I'm a little tired. Like I wasn't finding joy in my craft or my work anymore. And the former GM of Tusk, Jessica Baszler, who now she's co-owner of Someday Wine Bar in Portland, she had reached out to me and she's like, Naomi Pomeroy is looking for a new operations manager. And I was like, say what? The Naomi Pomeroy? Like Beast? Wait, like I had always wanted to work at Beast. Oh my gosh, that's like the top of your game. And Naomi, I mean, such an icon, I learned so much from her, but it was a slow burn to get that position. It took a lot of meetings. You know, she really, one thing I really admired about her is her ability to really read people like right away. Like she really had a knack where I would kind of move slow and be like, give him some time. I think we can work it out. She's like, she just knew and she was usually right. She was usually right. And I valued it so much. And I did get the position. It was very exciting. I quickly realized I was well over my head. I thought I knew what I was doing. I did not, so I kind of learned as I went. But luckily, because it had been already over 10 years of age, a lot of systems were built, and it kind of was running itself. In terms of like the service structure, I didn't have to be on the floor at night. It was a really dialed-in machine, and the staff was so seasoned and like at the top of their game that they ran the show. I was more back end, of course, and dialing it in. And I mean, I worked with Beast through the pandemic, and I helped rebrand and open Ripe Cooperative. But in that time, while I wasn't working in wine, I got to experience so much and see the relationship of pairing wine and how Naomi and Michael Garofalo worked together to create these really unique pairings. I mean, Michael at that time already, he had worked in wine for a long time. He knew so much. I also believe he was self-taught, like all these people. So it's like really cool, that Portland way, like do it your own way. It really spoke to me. I mean, because I wasn't always like, oh, I'm gonna go and I want to get all these certifications. That wasn't a drive for me. What the certifications offered was discipline and strengthen like how I like show up for wine, and how I stay relevant. And also like my palate was the strongest whenever I was in my study sessions and like in exam mode. My palate was prime, like the best. It's a little weak these days, but I'm getting back there. But at that time, it was so cool to just watch them work together because every 2 weeks the menu would change. So it would completely flip. Yeah, I mean, prior to that, it was every week. I mean, she changed that about a few years prior, but every week they would change the menu in the beginning. It's just, that was daunting to say the least. But I learned so much of how they talked about food and wine together because it was always like what she was dreaming up and then formulating, and she would draw these beautiful infographic like pictures of the plating, and every 2 weeks on Wednesday, so the menu would change on a Wednesday. So we had a couple days to dial it in, you know, because it was like we taste everything with the wine, and a lot of times it would change. Okay, this isn't right, we gotta adjust this. Oh, that wine wasn't right. I mean, a lot of times it was home runs, like that was a perfect pairing. Well, way to go. Because they just knew each other so well at that point. But it wasn't just about flavor profile I learned from the two of them working together and how they collaborated and talked about pairings. It was about texture and texture of food, texture of wine. So all these things came into play. That was really a valuable lesson for me that would help me later on in my career. So the pandemic hit. We didn't know what was happening. I was in the background helping keep that restaurant afloat, applying for grants, left and right, things I didn't understand anything about, just throwing myself into it because I wanted that business to survive. I believed in it. I believed in Naomi. I wanted it to have life still after whatever, on the other side of what this was. But by the summer, we realized Beast we have to put it to rest. I mean, there's no way that concept is going to survive in the next iteration of what this is, because we're moving into a whole new iteration of hospitality. So it was just a quiet burial, if you will. But Naomi is a phoenix, and she, was kind of leaning on her beginnings at working or starting Ripe in her own house in this catering company, and that's where Ripe Cooperative was born, this like new kind of marketplace, and kind of still, because it was still 2021, and we were going through those ebbs and flows of we're open, we're closed, and the policies were changing left and right, and we weren't opening during that time. So luckily, we kind of came at the more latter end when things were more stabilized. But still, so we were kind of focused on meal kits, and she took it a step level, another level up of creating videos to pair with these take home, so you can do a 5-course meal, and she's showing videos of some of the harder technical things you have to cook. So cool. So much work went into it. Design, I learned so much about every detail counts, right? And in that time, I was able to lead the wine and cider marketplace. So it was about 80 SKUs of wine and cider mainly. I think we dabbled with a little bit of beer just to have it, because you got to have beer. But it wasn't a focal point by any means. Wine was. So pairing wine with the meal kits, having wine for takeaway. And as we moved into that year one, I loved it. It was a whole new experience, working with Shopify, learning that whole platform. It was really, really cool. Getting to work with distributors again, and pairing wine with these meal kits. And then we slowly started to open it up as a bistro. Okay, you can dine in. And I kind of had an itch, because right before Ripe Cooperative opened, we were still furloughed, and I decided to work harvest. I was I still have time on my hands. So I've always wanted to do this, but I was so focused on management and building my career that I knew I could never really do a full harvest. It could be a few days, maybe take a week off, but I will never really be engrossed in it. And I am a tactile person. I learn by doing. I think a lot of us do in the industry. So I told myself, I had so much fun. I ended up working at Union Wine. So really big, very big, and I'm coming from very small restaurants. So everything about my world was small, farm to table, and I scaled way up. And I learned so much. I think it was really important. It more or less was conventional winemaking, and I think that's a huge value to know and understand, because that's a huge part of our market and wine business. So you really have to understand where people are coming from, and the why and the how. And I learned so much, and I worked with amazing people. I was a true cellar rat. It was a very exciting time. I was climbing I was climbing these giant tanks to do dips. I have a fear of heights. I really grew a lot during that time of being able to climb 4 stories. Are you kidding me? To drop a measuring tape into an abyss you can't really see, and you're do not drop your flashlight. Do not drop your flashlight into the juice. Please, Katie, don't do that. So really exciting, but at the end of that, I was I really want to do this again. I really owe it to myself. I love this experience. So I kind of got that itch, and I knew at that point, I think that chapter with Beast and Ripe was closing, and learning I learned what I could learn, and I wanted to pass the torch. It was time. That chapter, it was time to move on. And at this point, I knew enough people in the wine world. I had friends, from distributors to winemakers to restaurateurs, everything in between. And I learned that Graham Markell of Buonanotte was looking for cellar help. And I met Graham in 2017, 2018, and he was only making 100%, his 100% Sangiovese. And I loved it. I thought it was so cool. And he was growing, and he took me on. It was myself and a gentleman named David Moulton. He is in Bend now. But yeah, he kind of got his break in the wine restaurant scene in DC. So it was the 3 of us, 3 amigos, and we had the best of times. But it was the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of Union Wine and making wine. There were no pumps. I was siphoning wine to do pump overs. We were using a basket press. Yeah, I mean, it was wild. It was the best time. I was like, wait, there's no pump? I'm gonna siphon? Okay. I mean, it was a little, took some practice, I'm not gonna lie. Had to really build my lung strength, but did it and became quite good at it, I would say. But using a basket press for everything, using our feet, I mean, it was phenomenal. It was really cool to watch Graham in that environment and like making those choices, and like he was kind of like this quiet artist, you know, when he was in his thinking mode. Didn't say a lot, so you just kind of knew what you're like, okay, it's coming down the line. And we just had the best of times, really, really did. And it kind of led to me taking on more of a sales role and working as an assistant seller hand for him. And also at that time, I was working at Berlou. Berlou came back. It opened in 2019 and with really great success, but that was a tasting menu restaurant. So he adapted and kind of started doing this Vietnamese baking out of his location and realized he wanted to come back. So I was lead server and buyer, but it was a micro restaurant in every sense of the word. We didn't have any storage. So I didn't have, I mean, I maybe had like 10 wines on the list besides the pairings. So, but that was the best challenge, I would say, of my career of pairing wine with his food. It was really hard, it was really challenging, it was so exciting. And a lot of times it wasn't like how Naomi and Michael worked. A lot of times we were just talking a lot about the flavors, the textures. I wasn't able to taste. Sometimes it wasn't until a few days in I could taste one piece of it. It was just different. It was a different model. And I ran with it. We had a lot of fun. He believed in me. He wanted me to grow the program. And so we did this little pop-up for a while on Sundays when we were closed with his sous chef. We did this kind of little Vietnamese pop-up. So little Vietnamese snacking food with wine. It was so much fun. So much fun. It wasn't the easiest thing. I mean, a lot of people think we'd like maybe gravitate more towards beer for Vietnamese food and cuisine, Asian cuisine a lot, but I was just having a ball and working with my distributors, and it was really rad. I also was moonlighting at Nostrana for a bit, serving there. I was hoping to like kind of get into the SOM program, but they weren't quite ready. They were very progressive and like they were hiring for something later, but that later was just like not fast enough for me, and they understood. So after 3 months, I was like, I'm gonna move on to something else that's more wine focused. Like you're just, yeah. I applied for the sommelier position, and I don't want to just serve. Like I'm learning a lot because Italian wine was my Achilles heel. But lo and behold, I would come back to that. I would have my chance there, but so after Nostrana, I had also had a quick little stopover at Bar Casavale, and kind of running the wine list there. Spanish wine, amazing, one of my favorite regions. So much diversity, so much, it's been such a fast growth, and there's an evolution of how wine's made, and it's just, and yeah, the young winemakers and the new guard, it's phenomenal, and there's so much natural winemaking happening there, and so affordable. I don't know how they do it, but so affordable. Even Rioja, you're like, really? I think we should charge more, but really exciting time. It just wasn't quite the right fit for me. I love them. I love the OP. I really wanted to work for them again. I really valued the whole hospitality group, kind of the pull up your bootstraps and do it your own way. Everyone is just so magnificent that works there. Jess Harris, she's been such a mentor for me too, along with the late Star Black. So really an honor to work with her again. It was more on the periphery, but still such value to me for sure. And right when we were gearing up for harvest number 2, so excited. I mean, wine production is like, it just speaks to my heart so much. I love working every facet of my body, physically, mentally. It really just, I'm enamored by it. But I was also kind of looking for stability. I was doing a little bit of a hustle at this time, working multiple jobs. It was very exciting. It's what I wanted. I wanted a break from management, but I wanted stability. And Nostrana kind of knocked on my door and was like, we have this opportunity. And I was like, interestingly enough, I was gonna reach out to you after harvest. Like, I really miss you guys. I really valued what you're doing. I really loved how the leadership team worked. I was really curious, and they had an opening for their event producer, event coordinator. And I was like, well, that's actually really cool. Like it kind of pulls at, my heartstrings of being creative. I could plan wine dinners because they have such, they are such an institution and they have such a wide depth of network. And that was really spoke to me very much, especially in the wine world. And Austin, to be able to work with Austin Moore's Bridges, are you kidding me? Like, that was really cool. It really spoke to me. So I did get that opportunity and I got the job, and it was really cool. It was really exciting. We did so much there. In 2023, we came up with this idea, Women Crushing Wine, so all female winemakers. We hosted this sort of like industry trade tasting model, but open to the public. I think we had ended up having like 24 to 28 female winemakers. It was in early March or late March. It was so exciting. The event assistant and Kathy Wim's PA at the time, OJ, they were quite artistic, had a background in arts, different kind of arts mediums, and I really always wanted to do a zine. So the programming was a zine that OJ helped create, as well as the chef de cuisine at the time, or executive chef, Brian Murphy. He, during the pandemic, started dabbling in drawing. So he did some drawings for the zine as well. It was really fun, really cool. We had a ball. I hope it comes back one day. It was just such a big endeavor, and Nostrana's just always turning ideas. That was a hub for ideas. You have an idea? How are we gonna make it happen? So it was a really cool time, really cool experience. Also during that time, next door to the Nostrana's property, they started building a farm. So in 2023, we got a late start. It didn't start till August. We started hosting wine tastings out there, but 2024 hit the ground running in March and had hosted winemakers, distributors, you name it, every Friday night. It was so much fun. We leveled up as well and started adding food, because the year of 2023, we only had like focaccia, and that really wasn't gonna sell anything. I mean, it was nice to have like, keep people on site for like the Friday night reservations or walk-ins, but we knew we had to like bring more to the table, and we did, because Nostrana's just innovated like that. How do we keep building? And I loved that. I mean, I will say Nostrana was in speaking to my career in management and leadership, that really honed in the foundational tenets of like, how do we lead? How do we build efficiencies? How do we build organizational processes? It was huge, and it was important for me for Fancy Baby and that project I took on, because I did that myself, and Nostrana taught me so much about really how to be a leader, and how to be of community. Kathy Wims has built something quite beautiful, and I went into that job and that experience, again, like, Italian wine was my Achilles heel. There's so much to know there that you just don't know where to start. And I dabbled with Italian wine at OP. It would be Star Black definitely like lean in on more natural, but more Alpine, more like northern regions for sure. And by the end of it, I feel so much more confident, and I have come to love Italian wine. I remember kind of in my early stages, like the rusticity of Italian wine, the earthiness of Italian wine. I was just like, I don't really get it. And I was like, is this what I'm supposed to like? But you learn, and it grew on me. And I absolutely find it to be just so beautiful. There's so much depth, so much beautiful winemaking happening. I mean, that little peninsula, every piece of land is being farmed. It's very rare in a wine region like that, where you have from tip to tip, east to west. It's wild. From there, I kind of knew, I was like, well, what am I doing here? Like, I love playing events. I love Nostrana, but like, I'm kind of, where else can I take this? Like, I'm going to be planning events forever. Like, what do I want to do? And during my wine studies and my wine certifications with WSET diploma and stuff, I met a lot of amazing people in my study groups. Samantha Cole Johnson was part of it for a while. I knew, like, the minute I met her, I was like, oh, she's going far. She's legit. Like, I'm so grateful to be in her presence. Like, I learned so much from her. and Marissa Kipp was also in my study group, and we've maintained friendship and contact, and she was working for Crew and Domain at the time. And lo and behold, the owner, Will Oben, wanted to open his passion project, this champagne-focused wine bar. And they reached out to me, and I was curious at that time. This was fall of 2024, and I was curious. I knew my time was coming to an end at Nostrana. I didn't have an end goal. I said sometime in 2025. And this project just kept, the more I talked about it and more I met with Will, it just really excited me. The more I talked to Marissa, I was really excited. I mean, I love champagne, and I wasn't a strong suit of I didn't know a lot. I mean, I had my knowledge, my baseline for sure, and the big houses and the historical context, but the grower producers, couldn't name that many. So I really wanted to take on that challenge, and I was ready for a leap. I kept saying, I want to leap. I don't know what that leap looks like, but I'm ready to leap into the unknown and push myself and challenge myself. I felt a little too comfortable. So I did. And what's so exciting about that project was Will has built so many friendships with winemakers, with distributors. I mean, and then he created his own import company, OWC, and that really, it just was foundational of that programming, and getting to really taste through benchmark producers of the new guard, of the new generation of winemaking. I mean, he has it all, and he's out there making those connections and traveling a ton. So it really spoke to me. And we kind of both had the same vision of what we wanted Fancy the Baby to look like. And it, even more so, it really just honed in on my self-confidence of who I am in my career at this point, and what I can bring to the table, and how I want to lead, and how I want to build a team. And I was really proud of that project. But it just wasn't quite the right fit. But what honed in, what really became tenets for me were community focus. I don't want to just write wine lists. That doesn't excite me, but I want to be in community. I want to talk about what's happening at the ground level. I want to talk about the farming and the sustainability practices, and I really want to make sure that is represented every step throughout the process, and how I treat wine. I want to educate more. So I'm at a new crossroads. That's really exciting. There's some things in the fire, but I feel really excited of what the future holds. And I do know that wine is definitely going to be something that I hold very close, and it's going to be more not necessarily no longer on the periphery, but more in the fold for sure.
Wow.
I know.
Are there any famous Portland restaurants you haven't worked at?
I know. I've got, in my world, in my life, I mean, I move really slow. Everything's been at my pace. But it's about timing. I've just right time. And I think it just speaks to, I've just been really privileged and lucky, to say the least. And I want to challenge myself, and I want to be around really good people. And I've been very fortunate, yes, very fortunate.
Okay, I have lots of questions prompted by all of this. So let's start with hospitality, since hospitality was sort of the initial passion before wine and other things. So I always like to talk to people in hospitality about sort of how you define hospitality, maybe what you thought it was when you started, how that definition has changed. What is hospitality to you now? Yeah,
I mean, when I started in my teenage years, I mean, it was just a way to make ends meet, right? It was just a job. And I was working at a chain restaurant. So it really is it was more metrics, right? How to make your sale, how many people we can burn and turn. So, I mean, I learned a lot about standardization for sure, but it wasn't really about the guest experience. It kind of was that was second to how do we make revenue, And the Portland scene is what really opened my world up of hospitality. I treat hospitality of a place to escape, a place to celebrate, a refuge, if you will. Food and beverage, food specifically, it crosses cultural lines. It's something we all share that same. It's this. Yeah, it's the same thread that crosses everything, and it's an art in a lot of ways. it fills my cup up so much. So that's kind of how I look at it. Hospitality to me is, supporting each other, being community, really supporting every aspect of it. Again, like, how are we treating the land? How are we treating the stewards of the land? How are we treating the laborers? How are we paying them? You know, that is of value and importance to me, and what I look for in a job, and how people are treating, because it's not about, it scales all the way up. And over time too in hospitality, like, how do we stand out? How do we make it special? And the small touches, and learning people's needs before they even realize what they, before they even need it. I find that to be of value, and it's really exciting to really start to read people. I mean, at one point I thought I wanted to be a sociologist, because I just love watching people. I do. It's so fascinating. We're such interesting creatures, organisms, if you will. So we are so unique, each and every one of us. So, and watching people walk through a restaurant and taking their experience, and it's such a short blip of time you are meeting people. So you get so much in one time. You are a therapist at times, you are a coach. You also, what's so exciting about hospitality is the people that come back, the return patrons, and getting to know them, seeing them have children, seeing their family grow, and they become part of your own family in a way, and friendships are formed, and that is just what it's all about at the end of the day, is building that network. And that's really important to me in hospitality, and how it's sort of driven me in my decision making of where I work and who I work with.
So obviously, building wine lists has been a big part of various stops along the way, and you talked a little bit about kind of your philosophy of building a wine list. Tell me about how that has how you've sort of strengthened in that, and building wine lists now. What are the sort of the key components, and how do you sort of interject yourself into a wine list? Yeah, well, I think at the beginning it was a lot about self, and you kind of have to take ego and self out of it, because it's not about what you like. Because as I've grown and worked my way in different certifications, and just started to really learn more about wine, and learn what I like and don't like, I don't really care for inoculated wines. Like, I want wines that bring in their own yeast, and I want less oak intervention. I think oak is great, but I don't want it to be the forefront. And a lot of people don't necessarily align with my taste. So first and foremost, you really got to really look at what people want, what the mass audience wants. Yes, I have a say in it, but it really has to be like, okay, I have to be a little bit more objective of like, what don't I like about this wine? Is it because I don't like the oak, but is it overpowering? Like, is the wine still speaking to me in a way? So maybe that does have a place on the list. For me, writing wine lists, I kind of spoke about this prior. It really is about the mission statement of the restaurant, aligning with that, the ethos of the restaurant, making sure that it aligns with the food. At Tusk, I'm not going to have big Barolos, because we're not serving food that necessarily would pair. I'm going to serve wines that are akin to that, but it's got to have acidity, it's got to have depth, like it's got to have liveliness. It can't just be the super overly tannic wine. Or we would see Nebbiolo, but not necessarily like Southern Italian wines, like Aglianico. That just doesn't have a place on the list. So you have to know that you can't be afraid to say, well, I can't have something for everyone. Like, sometimes being exclusive is okay, and that's when you can market and talk about your peers, and like, well, they're doing this really cool thing, and that's where you're gonna overstretch yourself, and then your wine list becomes muddled. It no longer has an identity or direction. And of course, like, working with, as Scott Frank told me, and kind of instilled in me, is like building those relationships and making sure you're taking care of your distributors, and in return they'll take care of you, and really learning their lists and what they're offering, and seeking out those hidden gems and listening to what they like, because they have their voice is just as important. They're there doing the hard work as well. And yeah, I mean, those are really the core pieces to it. I think in the beginning it was daunting. Like, I want everything on the list. I like too much. So you got to narrow it down. And over time I learned, like, these are the key pieces, and you can't be for everyone. And that's where the glass pour gets
can be really fun. That's what you get to play. So maybe your list is heavily Italian because that's really what the restaurant deems. But we're in Portland, the Willamette Valley is in our backyard, Hood River. So you can play and have more local on your glass pour list if if the ethos is to have a more predominant one region. So, I mean, that's really where you get to have your fun and be more exploratory, I think. And take more risks. So never underestimate a glass pour list. It's true. It's fun. It's fun.
We'll flip it around for a moment and talked about you as a consumer of wine. So tell me about, as a consumer, when you see a wine list, how do you judge it? How do you determine its personality? What do you look for as a consumer?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always like I look at it as I'm just exploring what I always flip through the full list. I'm looking at all the regions, what they're offering, kind of looking for those benchmark producers that I know. Like, are they leaning more smaller intervention, small production? Are they like just highlighting the classics? And then I'm really speaking to the staff on the floor. Just because I know wine, I am still a student. Like, I don't know everything. I'm never gonna know everything. So I wanna hear from the people that are working the floor and know it well. They know better than me. They're doing it nightly. So I'm always asking advice. Well, what are you liking right now? Whether it be the server, or if there's a sommelier in the floor or wine directors working that night, I want to hear from them. I want to know. It's really valuable to me. And they typically, when I do that, it opens my world up. I'm tasting a wine I'm not familiar with. I'm having the best of times. That's what it's all about. Like, working on the floor in these different establishments, it's so often like, people kind of like stay in their comfort zone, especially when you're leaning towards like a fully Italian wine list. It's intimidating for sure. I've watched people go through it and like get a little embarrassed, and it's like, we're trying to break down those walls and barriers for you. That's why we're here. But people don't want to ask. They want to like sound like they know what they're doing. Maybe they're on a date. I get it. I've been on enough dates. I get it. But it's not about that. Like, be open to the opportunity. That's why they're there. So often when people allow us to take the steering wheel and they give us that authority, it opens our world up too. And that so often when people would like write in or email, like, I had this wine I've never heard of before. That was amazing. That was the most amazing night. You just changed my evening. And where can I find this? Like, I'm enamored. I want to drink this every day now. And I love that. That's so valuable. It's so small, but it's so big. It's exactly why we're here, why I'm here specifically. It's those little moments of time. And that's how I kind of share when I'm navigating a wine list, for sure.
So you mentioned the part in your career where you leaned into management and worked your way up the ladder there. Tell me about that decision to work into management and about sort of finding your management leadership style. Obviously, as someone who does the same, I know about the bumps along the way. So tell me about kind of finding your way and figuring out who you are as a leader.
Yeah, it's a long journey. Like, honestly, I mean, age plays a lot into it. Like, I have now reached the 40s, and I mean, I'm 41 now, but it's like something has shifted. It's been a slow burn, a slow shift, but being confident in what I have to say and in my own skin I've never experienced anything like it. And because I think in my youth, when I was kind of growing up in this world of wine, it was kind of a men's club. And it was hard to crack into that and feel like, well, where is my voice? I didn't see a lot of peers that looked like me. And still to this day, it's still an issue of like women in leadership in the wine field. And Bree Stock's doing so much work on that. And like really, her voice is really loud about that. And I mean, it's someone to really like watch out for and like listen to. But for me, in my early days, I was just wanting to be challenged and curious. It was really about how do I want to keep adding tools to my tool belt. So I was kind of never like, and I wasn't really allowing myself to stop and sort of like simmer and like really experiencing what I'm doing. It was just like on to the next, on to the next. It's just kind of how my brain works. I was eager, I had tenacity, I was competitive in some form. Like, how do I, mainly to myself, but so it was like, it was a ladder. I was climbing and taking all these tools, but I I never allowed myself to stop and say, well, what are you doing? Like, what does this bring to the table? Like, what have you learned? And so it took me a while to build that self-confidence. And over time, it just sort of solidified, like seeing how I was managing teams and the feedback I was getting from teams. That's really important to me, like leading in a human-centered way. Like, I value the feedback of staff as much as I value my own feedback. Like, I want to know. It's got to be cyclical. It's not just, I don't want to be a hierarchy. I want it to be a very inclusive environment. And honestly, Nostrana, like, it was at first daunting, like systems, SOPs, that takes work. You got to build it for it to work. And they kept saying that, yes, this is daunting, but it's going to help you in the long run. And they are right. They are right. And it really helped in being organized and creating efficiencies. And that, when I came into that program, the private events program, and it was a baby, it was in its infancy because it started in 2019, and it was just ramping up when the pandemic hit. And then there was nothing. And it kind of was coming back online in 2021, 2022, but I started in 2022, so it was still brand new. We were learning, it was basically ground zero. You do what you want with this program. So I was building a lot of efficiencies and learning like what makes sense here and how do we drive this program, networking. Those are all tools and valuable skill sets, but it really was. Nostrana really solidified like who I want to be as a leader, and that's, again, making sure that you have the organizational processes, like doing the work for yourself and your team, and being okay that, like, to break it down. If it doesn't work, break it down, start over. I've been reading more and more about like ikigai, like these Japanese philosophies, and kaizen of like, it started in like the 1950s with the Tokyo like manufacturing company, and I think it was either a sociologist or an economist, I can't remember, but there was an American gentleman that kind of worked with them, and they were creating this kaizen, like little bits of small like effort create the bigger change. So like every day they would, after they would have their work day, they would listen to the workers, like what worked, what didn't. They wanted to hear from everyone, and like really being objective about yourself, like how did you play a role in this? How do you, like, where were your fault lines? And how do you want to change that? Like little small increments every day creates change and progress and innovation. And that really, I find that of value, and I kind of want to lean into that more and more in my leadership skills. And being very human-centered, that really is important to me. I value that immensely.
Well, perfect segue, because you brought up the pandemic again. So I'm curious about someone in your role who's leaned into hospitality, leaned into food and wine service. Pandemic hits. You're working in a restaurant. You're working to get through. You're working to keep the place afloat and figure out the next thing. But I'm curious, from sort of a personal perspective, how does that affect you when sort of your life's work is threatened in that way? What were you considering at that time, and what were you going through, and how did you sort of come out the other side?
Yeah, it was really a hard time. I mean, a lot of aha moments, a lot of like, is this industry going to survive? Like, there was no doubt in my mind that prior to the pandemic, like I could take this industry, I can go anywhere with this industry. Like I can travel, I can metamorphose into anything, but like into many roles. But it just crossed so many lines, so many cultures. It seemed like endless possibility, and it seemed like it would never go away. And the pandemic hit, and it was really unnerving and scary because everything we knew was changing. And it has changed. It has changed. Nothing is the same. We're in a new iteration of hospitality and restaurants. And it's definitely more challenging for sure. But at that time, I mean, I am really grateful that I was working at Beast and for Naomi Pomeroy, because at first we thought we were going to pivot and do takeout. And her brother has a background in like web design or back-end design, and he like within like a day and a half created this website for us. We were going to do takeout. It was just going to be like the core management. And then within 24 hours, she was like, this isn't going to work. I kind of crunched the numbers. This isn't going to work. We just can't, this isn't who we are. And she's like, we just have to close. And I really value that. You know, she wasn't afraid to be like, okay, like we're not going to do it. We have to just take a beat. We don't know what's going on. Like, let's just see and take a minute to understand what's happening. So I really find so much value in that. And she wasn't afraid to stay closed. And a lot of my peers and restaurant groups around town were ebbing and flowing, and there was so much policy change, and like, you're closing, you're opening, and mask, no mask, and that in itself was so trying for people. It was so exhausting. And so I'm really glad, I mean, we were doing our own legwork, making sure that we were paying staff on health insurance at that time still, so making sure that like we were getting funding to just support our small staff for as long as we could. Making sure we're navigating the unemployment system, because that crashed, and some of our staff did not, it took time. So we were and Naomi she had her hands in everything. She was, her background was poli-sci, and so she just was immediately reaching out to people that were like, had their hands in the political field and learning things before things were happening. So we kind of had a leg up in that way. It was really cool to be around. But I had moments of, is this the end of my career? What am I going to go into? Looking into these like certification processes, do I go into like, I don't know, data science? I'm like, no, thank you. I think I like took a call with someone. They're like, well, do you like puzzles? I'm like, kind of. They're like, I don't think you're going to like this. It's all about figuring out puzzles. Like, oh, okay, thank you for that. You're right. I don't think I'm going to like this. My brain doesn't operate that way. Okay, so, but I took a beat and I stayed positive. It was such a gift at that time to be furloughed and making money. It was just like, I took nothing for granted. But I was out in nature. Nature is such a solace for me. I was camping more, these things that you just don't get an opportunity. So, and just having time to like take care of myself, because I think we all quickly realized how we were just churning. We were living this thing that was just, it couldn't sustain itself. It was gonna break at some point. So it was kind of this, coming to a head. And, but at the end of the day, I knew, I'm like, I don't want to see this die. I want this to continue. I don't want things to just fall by the wayside. We have to fight for this. We have to fight for restaurants. They're an important piece and thread and network to every community, small and large. It's a place to be an activist, to celebrate things, to mourn things. It's everything. We need it. So that it's of value to me, and I want to be a part of that for as long as possible.
Obviously, you mentioned production coming up at some point in the story here, and I'm curious, after being as educated in wine and as sort of immersed in wine as you had been, what was your initial reaction to doing production? Was it what you expected? What did you enjoy about it? What surprised you about it?
Yeah, I had no expectations going in, because everything was by book. I learned everything, in textbooks. So that's why I really wanted to work Harvest. I really wanted, because it'll solidify what I've been learning. Because there's some things that were still holes. Like, well, how is A to B to C? And you only can do that by being in the experience, immersing yourself. I will say with Union, it was kind of a culture shock in some form, because it was just such a large-scale operation. And to be this true cellar rat, to work around these giant tanks, to be moving wine in these small, pipes, if you will, from one giant tank to the other across a parking lot, it was wild. And climbing these stairs and working with different yeast cultures. And, it was, and it also kind of at times could be a little bit boring, because it was tedious, because doing a cellar rat, being a cellar rat, you're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. But that was helpful, because in the beginning, knew nothing. I was so scared. I was taking as many notes. I was making mistakes. I did break a line once. Everyone does it. Everyone was cool about it. I was embarrassed, but you live and learn. And by the end, it was like second nature. I was like teaching people, and I was like, this is rad. And I was like, I think I could do this for a lot longer. But I think more my scale is at small, like working with Graham. It's more holistic approach. There's more nuance to it. There's more variability, which I value. Like, you really are working with the vintage and what is offered to you with that cycle, versus like we're trying to standardize a product, and that didn't really speak to me as much. And I mean, a lot of people ask, like, because it's kind of a natural evolution for sommeliers, like they start making wine, everyone thinks they can make wine. But I've learned, and watching my peers and my friends, like it's a brand, and I don't want to brand myself necessarily, so I don't necessarily know if I want to be a winemaker. It is really cool. It's something beautiful. It's a lot of hard work. It's not for the faint of heart. I think a lot of people also romanticize it when it's not. It's a lot of hard work, and like, you're an independent contractor, and how do you make money? And you got to sell yourself, and you've always got to be like every season, you got to be doing something to build your brand. So I learned that, like, I don't necessarily want to like make wine, but I do value wine production. And if I find myself doing that again, I'd be happy to do it, working in a winery in some facet. Whether that's just on the side, if I'm working in a winery in sales or hospitality, then maybe that's something I can do, in the season. I find that of value, and I would really enjoy that. But wine production really speaks to me. You learn so much. I got to learn about how to blend wine, blending trials, what that's like, really hard, really exhausting on the palate. Climbing barrels to do top-offs, again, fear of heights and just like navigating that. The different nuances of wine, like when it's ready to be racked or whatever. So all of that was such a great experience, and really solidified the more foundational knowledge of wine and winemaking and how I approach wine as well. Very much so.
So you talked a little bit about your future at a sort of a crossroads right now. I'm curious sort of about what you're going to do, but what have you not done yet that you want to do? What is on the list that you want to accomplish?
I've done a lot. I've dabbled in a lot of aspects of wine. I would like to do more education for sure. I do find value in it now that I'm like finding my voice, and I'm more, have more of that confidence. I would really value, education. Another project that I started in the pandemic era, and I started last year on the Nostrana farm, Lorto Nostrana, is beekeeping, apiary work. So I did have 2 hives. They did not survive, unfortunately. Our climate's really hard. I did everything right. I'm actually in the OSU's extension program for master beekeeping. So I've kind of been, I've been in Florida that, right now I find it to be more advantageous to work closely with PUB, the Portland Urban Beekeeping Association. They have hives over, it's called Green Acres. It's in St. John's, right by the St. John Bridge. And yes, they don't host anything in the winter because you can't open hives if it's 55 degrees or cooler. It's just really risky for the bees. So I've learned so much through them. So just, I think I don't know if I'll continue on my journey with the master beekeeping, but I've learned so much, and I want to keep that up. So that would be of interest, working with wineries and having that biodiversity and pollinator habitat going. So that would be really cool. I see that in my future for sure. As I continue, I will have hives again. I will have a hive or 2 again this year. I don't know if it'll be on the farm. I left all my material there, but there's a lot of land out there that I can work on. But it's really exciting. Beekeeping has taught me so much, really about how to move slow. You can't go fast. I'm a very fast person, energetic person. So it's really taught me to how to be methodical, how to be slow, how to watch for things, how to really look at behavior. And it really has crossed over in so many aspects of my life as well. I see leadership also as a continued foray in my career. I'm not done with that. I'm kind of finding my voice there as well. And I really do love building teams and really learning about people and finding the right roles for them and letting them soar. I'm in this new iteration of, I want to be that mentor to someone. I'm ready for that. So that would really excite me as well, whether it be in wine or some other field, in the restaurant or hospitality field. I would really enjoy that as well.
So let's talk about the Oregon wine industry a little bit at a kind of a larger level. I'm curious about sort of your initial impressions of Oregon wine and the Oregon wine industry when you got here, the people here, the people making wine, the people selling wine, the wines themselves, when you first kind of came to Oregon, and how that has evolved in the time you've been here.
Oh my gosh, so much has evolved. When I came here in 2007, I mean, yes, it was growing fast, but I think it was still like, I don't know, 600 producers or something. It was still really
way less than that.
Yeah, right? It was so small. And like, what my big takeaway at that time, when I was really starting to learn wine, it was just a band of people that supported each other. The community is so strong. I kind of like looked at them as like, I really like the Grateful Dead. It's like a band of hippies in a way. Like, and hearing about the foundation of David Lett and some of these pioneers that like they were taught this one way, this is what was learned and what we knew, and they were like, you can't grow in these colder climates, and they just had the innovation and tenacity to say, let's try. I mean, it speaks a lot to the times, right? There was so much going on and change happening, and how we thought and how we challenged the status quo. So, I mean, of course, that is. I mean, I look up to that so much, but they spearheaded such a movement, and look at it now. So yes, it's grown so much to the point where like I can't keep track of the new production, and there is a lot of money. Like we're seeing so much international money coming in here. So obviously they see something that's been here all along. The growth and the potential of the terroir, the climate. I mean, climate change has made such an impact as well of where you can grow, right? And I mean, that's really the biggest takeaway in general is just, and I've tried to like come down here as much as possible. It's been hard. Like that's been kind of selling wine in Portland and being in that field. It's been kind of like a double-edged sword where why don't you sell more of our wine? And it's like, well, it's not that easy. When you have your tasting rooms in our backyard selling it at this price point, but then it's at this price point, it's really hard to sell at the normal markups, so it's not that easy. And so it speaks a lot. So I tried to like build relationships. I really value networking. So I would come down here. I got invited to Pinot Camp. That was a huge deal to me, learning so much. Mimi, that's when I met Mimi Castile. I mean, I'm in love. Who isn't when you meet her? I mean, her voice, it's in what she's promoting and what she's working on and what she's challenging. I mean, that is the future of our industry for sure. Bree and Chad Stock, I mean, what they're doing is really of importance to me. So yes, I value, and you have to look at the historical context of the vineyards that started it all, and they are of importance. Like there are my benchmark producers that I love for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and looking at the different terroirs and AVAs. But for me, the future of the Oregon wine community is about that ingenuity and innovation. We're not looking at Pinot Noir and Chardonnay as the sole grape that we're growing. We're looking at expanding our grape varietals. We're looking at how we can challenge farming and be more sustainable and protect our land and the laborers and the stewards of the land. And some of these people I just mentioned, they are leading the charge, and it is. And I like to be in their court, and I will support them forever because this is what we need to be doing. Things are moving so fast. We're in really inundated times. There's so much going on, especially with climate. So we need to take care of what we have so that future generations can continue to enjoy what we get to enjoy. It's like the most important thing. I will say too that while I really enjoy Willamette Valley. I mean, that's where everything got started. But for me, the Hood River is where it's at. That is the most interesting climate, the most interesting winemaking that's happening, and I know people are seeing it. I know that there is money being drawn to that region, but yeah, the Hood River is just like kind of where my heart's at right now, and what's going on in those EVAs. It's pretty phenomenal.
Last question for you.
Okay.
What are you proudest of? What's your greatest achievement and greatest accomplishment?
Gosh, that's such a hard question. I mean, I haven't peaked yet. I'm really proud of my tenacity. Like, I'm really proud that I've had the privilege of working where I've worked. It wasn't until recently, I think, when I was like applying for Fancy Baby and applying elsewhere. Now that like I'm sort of an open candidate to what's next. And people are like, gosh, your resume, it's so astounding. I'm like, right, I did that. So I'm really proud of where I started. And I mean, I started at a Red Lobster in Albany, New York. And I've done a lot. And I'm really excited about the future. For a long time, I was like, where do I want to go with this? Like, oh, I have this beautiful degree in science, but I'm doing it, I'm living it, I'm breathing it in my own way. Like, I'm finding my own path, and that is kind of a big achievement and accomplishment to me of like, you are carving your own path, like make what you want of it and enjoy it, because we spend so much of our life working. And I kind of learned at the early age, like, I can't be in an office. I need to just have my hands on a lot of things. I need to be talking to people. I want to be building community. So, and that's what this wine community, that's what this, the wine community, the restaurant community, that's what it's all about. We take care of each other, and Portland is just so tight-knit. Yeah, so those are some of my accomplishments so far.
It occurs to me now that I said that was the last question, but you also did bring a prop, and I wanted to set you up to talk about if you want to talk about your prop.
I do. So when I was working at Olympia Provisions, and Star Black was working there, I had dinner one night, and she, I learned so much from her, but I was like, Star, what should I drink? It may have been just a few months in, and I was there with my former partner, and she was like, well, what do you want to drink? I was like, what should I drink? Just tell me. She's like, okay, what are you having for dinner? And she's like, you should try this wine. And it was Alice and Olivier Demore. They're producers from Chablis, started in 1989, this couple, and they're just right outside of Chablis in Olivier's hometown. And it kind of was one of my aha moments. I was like, this is Chardonnay? Are you kidding me? Like, the minerality, the steeliness of it. I've never had anything like it. It was absolutely beautiful. And she was like, well, something I like to do when I really enjoy a wine is I save the label. So I was like, oh, that's really sweet. And so she went and did that for me. And she saved the label. So it was 2013. And I haven't fully taken this practice, like, I haven't continued religiously, but I do sometimes will take a label and keep it in my notebooks. But it is just so sweet to me, and it's kind of one of my aha moments. And I've saved it, and I look back on it, and it just warms my heart. And it's such a beautiful label too. The art is just so beautiful. And it's a beautiful wine. Yeah. So, yeah. I should bring that back in the fold, that practice of saving more labels. But yeah, that one really speaks to me.
That's amazing. That's a great aha moment. I like that.
It is. It really is.
All the questions that I have for you today. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover?
I don't think so. I covered a lot. I appreciate it. Thanks for allowing me to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out, share your story with us, and all your perspectives. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Okay.
Thank you.